In today's lecture, we are going to see what is the scope of the variable. Then we are going to see what is namespace in C++. Then we are going to see nested classes in C++ and local classes in C++. So these points we are going to cover in today's lecture. What is the scope of the variable? What is mean by scope of the variable? A scope is a region of a program. A scope is a region of a program. And broadly speaking, there are three places, that is regions, where variables can be declared. First one is inside the function or block, which is called a local variable. You can declare the variables inside the function or inside the block. That variable is called as local variable. Then in the definition of the function parameter, which is called as formal parameters, wherein also we can declare the variables. And third one is outside of all the functions, which is called as global variables. So what is local variables? Variables that are declared inside a function or block are called as local variables. So whatever variables you are declared inside a function or inside a block are called as local variables. Next is what is global variables. A global variable is defined outside of all the functions. This global variable defines outside of all the functions. That variable is called as global variable. Then I am going to explain this with the help of demonstration. So is this program visible properly? Yes, anyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is a simple program wherein we have included the IO string and we have used the namespace std, and this is the way to declare the global variable. Outside the main, we have declared one variable integer g. The g variable is called as global variable. Whereas inside the main, we have declared two variables, integer a and integer b. These variables are called as local variables. And then we have initialized this a and b to value 10 and 50, and we have done addition, and that addition will be printed on the console. Now I am going to compile the program. There are 0 errors and 0 warnings. It is successfully compiled. Now I am going to execute it. Just a minute. The output is 60. Okay. So value of a is 10 and value of b is 50, and we have done addition of a and b. Then we have done it in global variable g, and we have printed the addition, that is 60. So what is the scope of the variable here? What is the scope means? This variable you can access where, in which locations? That is called the scope of the variable. So this g variable, that is global variable, you can access anywhere in your program. Okay, You can access this G variable inside the main. You can access it in another variable. But this local variables integer a and b, you can't access it anywhere. For example, I am going to write one function over here, void add. Inside this function, suppose I am going to set this value a to 100. This is not allowed here because this a variable is declared inside this main function, and the scope of this a variable is within this function only. Means you can access this a variable within this main. You can't access outside the main. So I'm going to just compile the program and see there is error. What is the error over here is a was not declared in this scope. That is the error. A was not declared in this scope. Means this a variable is not declared inside the variable inside the function add. So this is not the way to access this variable here, which is declared inside the main. Okay, suppose now I will explain to you another integer c variable you have declared, and you have set it to some value here, suppose 12. I have just declared one variable inside the add function. And now this c variable I am going to access inside the main. C. I am going to do the addition of a, b, and c variable inside the main, but c is declared inside the add, and which is local variable here. This is called as local variable. So I'm going to compile the code. Now it will show me error over here at the line number 19. And what is the error over here? C was not declared in this scope. C was not declared in this scope. Means compiler don't know what is C inside the main, which is declared inside the add function. And this is the local variable. This add C variable you can access within this scope, within this function, not outside the function, and that is called as scope of the variable. Suppose I am going to write here value of C. It is accessible over here, but not here. Still will get the error. I am going to remove this. Wait, and we have not called that add function. I want to add it from here. Zero rest 0 1 is, and this is the output 16 and 12. So this variable C is accessible within this add function. Whereas this global variable G you can access anywhere. You can access it inside the main. As we have seen, we have done addition here, and we can also access this over here. I will just print the value of G over here. Now I am going to access this G inside the add. G is the global variable. There are 0 errors and 0 warnings. And now you can see this G is accessible inside the add because it's a global variable, and this is the scope of the variable G. G variable can be accessed anywhere in your code, and this add G is accessible in add function as well as in main function. But local variable of add function you can't access anywhere outside the add. You can access it within the function, that is called as scope of the variable. Now I am going to declare one class student, and inside this I have public members, integer roll number. Okay, and I'm going to add this I'm going to write this add function inside the class. Okay, and I'm going to print only roll number over here. For time being, I'm going to initialize this to 20. Inside this, I'm going to just create the object class student s1. I'm going to call s1 dot add. See the compile it. There are warnings, undefined symbols A and B. Okay. So you can access this roll number inside this add. So just access. This is the roll number 20. So what I done in this program is I have declared one class student. I have public member roll number. Inside the add, I have just displayed the roll number here over here. And this roll number is accessible inside the add. Okay. Now I'm going to declare this roll number in the private part. See the output. Roll number is 200, and we are getting 200 as a output. So this private, even though you have declared this integer roll number in private, which is accessible inside the add. Now I am going to display this roll number inside the main. Instead of calling this add function, I want to display roll number over here. So save it and compile it. It shows you error at the line number 28. What is the error? Roll number was not declared in the scope. Roll number was not declared in the scope, means this roll number is not accessible here. So roll number, private members, you can't access outside the class. Though you have used object dot roll number, just see. Compile it. You will get this integer student roll number is private. This is private variable, and you can access this private within this class only, not outside the class. You have access this over here by using the object. It is not allowed. Now I'm going to declare this roll number in public, and in this roll number I have access using the object s1.roll number, and just see. It is successfully compiled, and then it will display the 200. So whatever public members are present is accessible inside the main. That is the scope of the variable, these public members. Whereas if you declare any private variable, this private variable is accessible within this class, means we can access this inside the function which is present in the class, not outside the function, that is main. It is not accessible in the main. So this is all about the scope of the variable. What we have seen, what is meant by local variable and where you can access it, what is global variable and where you can access it, and then we have demonstrated we have two parts, private and public. Whatever members are public, which is accessible outside the class, that is we can access it in the main, whereas private members you can't access outside the class. Whatever private members are present, you can't access outside the class, that is you can't access it inside the main. You can access it within the class only. Now moving forward, next is namespace. So what is namespace? Consider a situation when we have two persons with the same name. For example, Sachin in the same class. And there will be an ambiguity. A person having the same person. This PPT is visible? Anyone?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So consider a situation when we have two persons with the same name, Sachin, in the same class. So in suppose you are class SY and a particular name Sachin is two persons having the same name, that is Sachin. And if somebody calls Sachin, so there will be an ambiguity to which Sachin a particular person has called. To differentiate it, we need some mechanism, and that mechanism is called as namespace. Whenever we need to differentiate them, definitely we would have to use some additional information along with their name, like either the area or the class name or roll number, etc. Okay. So for example, two persons having the name Sachin and one person is having roll number 1 and another having roll number 2. So I can call roll number 2 Sachin like this, roll number 1 Sachin, so that Sachin will understand to whom it is called. Roll number 1 Sachin means that roll number 1 will be accessible, or that roll number so that Sachin know that the roll number 1 will be pointed to that person. So likewise, namespace is used. There are same situations can arise in your C++ applications. For example, you might be writing some code that has a function called display, and there is another library available which is also having the same function display. Okay, so there could be a situation wherein you have declared function display and there is library function which has the display. So now the compiler has no way of knowing which version of display function is are referring to within your code. So there will be an ambiguity. So namespace is designed to overcome this difficulty, and it is used as additional information to differentiate similar functions, classes, variables, etc. with the same name available in different libraries. So this namespace will help us to differentiate between different functions, classes, and variables. So using namespace, you can define the context in which names are defined. So in a sense, a namespace defines a scope. Again, this namespace will help us to define the scope. How to define namespace? Namespace definition begins with the keyword namespace. We have seen a keyword namespace. This keyword is used to declare the namespace. Namespace, you have to begin with the namespace keyword, and then you have to give any name to the namespace. And then open the curly bracket, put your code declaration inside it, and close it. So this is the way to declare the namespace, to define the namespace. To call the namespace, enable version of either function or variable prepend with the scope resolution operator. The namespace names as follows. So name and code. Code is a variable and name is a namespace name. And you have to, this is the way to call that particular variable present in the namespace name. So we are going to see using directive. What is this using? You can also avoid prepending of the namespace with the using namespace directive. It is called as directive. This using is called as directive. So what is the use of this directive is, this directive tells the compiler that the subsequent code is making use of the names in the specified namespace. So if you are using the directive using, then it tells to the compiler that I'm going to use that particular namespace. So I'm going to explain this with the help of demonstration. So just I'm going to execute this code. So inside first space and inside second space is the output. So this is the code. Initially we have written two statements, hash include IOStream, and we are going to use the namespace std. So this is the way to declare the namespace. First is keyword namespace, and then you can give name to the namespace. I have given here first space, and inside this first space I have mentioned void function, and inside this I have written one statement inside first space. I have declared another namespace. You can declare n number of namespace in your code. So namespace second space. Okay, so this is the second namespace, and inside it we have one function having the same name, function, and we have printed inside second space. So this function and this function having the same name, and to differentiate this among these two functions, we have put this function in first space and we have put this second function in second space. Now in the main, how to access this first function? To access this first function, you need to write the name of the namespace, that is first space, and then semicolon, double semicolon, that is scope resolution operator, and then you have to mention name of the function. So this will cause the first function, that is this. You can easily locate this function by looking at this statement. First space, That is, this is our first space. Inside scope resolution operator means in first space namespace we have this function, so we need to call this function. Compiler will automatically understand by looking at the statement which function to be called. Similarly for second space semicolon function. So this is the way to call this function. Now I am going to compile it, and this is the output inside first space and inside second space. So this is the way you can declare the namespace and you can access the variable function or classes present in the namespace. Now I am going to demonstrate it. Suppose I have just said it inside comment, and I'm going to call function. When I say this function, just see what will happen. There is an error, and what is the error over here is error function was not declared in the scope. This function is not declared in the scope. Means compiler don't know where is this function. To understand to the compiler which function it is, you need to prepend it with the namespace. First space scope resolution operator. Now compiler will understand you have called this function from the first space. Save it, compile it, and get it into it. Now you will get the output as inside function. You will get the output as inside function, inside first space. Similarly, if I said function, still compiler will give you error, and it will say, just look at the message, error, function was not declared in the scope. Means compiler has not found any definition declaration of this function. Okay, this function is present, but it is present in the namespace and not, you are not mentioned over here the namespace. That's why compiler simply gives you the error message. Read the error message carefully and understand that error message, so that you can easily remove the errors present in your code. So now I am going to say a second space function. So inside second space, okay. Now if suppose there are n number of variable functions, variable classes present in the namespace, every time I need to write this namespace. So how to remove this? So there is directory. The directory is called as using namespace, and then name of the namespace, that is first space. Now in this code I am going to use this using is called a directory, and it tells to the compiler that we are going to use the namespace first space. Now I am going to call this function. I have not prepended it with the namespace name and scope resolution operators. I have simply written function. So just compile it and see the output. So you will get the message inside first space. Inside first space. You have not prepended it with the namespace as we have seen earlier. When you say using namespace, compiler will automatically check for the definition of this function in the first space. So there is function. So it will be invoked and it will get executed. This function will be executed, not this function, because we have not used this second namespace. Now I am going to simply show what is that std. So whenever we create a project, I will create another one temporary project. And this is the by default code. Just compile it and get it executed. You will get the message hello world. So inside this, we have used this namespace std. Suppose I am going to remove this. Then save the program and compile it. You will get the error message. What is the error message? Cout was not declared in this scope, and endl was not declared in this scope. Okay, when you are not used this namespace std, this cout is not accessible, because the definition of this cout will be present in the namespace std. Std is for standard library, standard. So whatever standard functions, objects, classes are present, they all are present in the std library. That's why we are using this namespace. So if suppose I'm not going to use this directory, so I'm going to write here std, and for endl still I'm going to write std. Now I'm going to execute the code. Compile it. There are 0 errors and 0 warnings, and execute. You will get the output hello world. You will get the output. So every time whenever you write cout, you need to write std scope resolution operator and cout. For every time you write endl, you need to write std semicolon endl. Similarly, for in statement, you need to write similar thing. To avoid to write this std every time, we are going to use using directory. This using is called as directory. It tells to the compiler we are going to use the std namespace. So just no need to write this every time in your code. Compile it and get it executed. You will get the output hello world. So this is the significance of this namespace. Now I'm going to continue with some remaining points of the namespace. So namespace allows us to group named entities that otherwise would have global scope into the narrow scope, giving them namespace scope. This allows organizing the elements of the program into different logical scope referred to by the names. The namespace is a feature added in C++ and not present in C. A namespace is a declarative region that provides a scope to the identifier, that is names of the types, functions, variables, etc. inside it. Multiple namespace blocks with the same name are allowed. All declarations within those blocks are declared in the named scope. Namespace definition begin with the keyword namespace followed by the namespace name. So these are some of the points. Namespace declaration appear only at a global scope. The scope of the namespace is global. Now you can understand what is the global scope, what is local scope, and what is the scope of the variable. Namespace declaration can be nested within another namespace. Means inside another particular namespace, you can write another namespace. Namespace declaration don't have access specifiers like public or private. They don't have that access specifiers. No need to give semicolon after the closing braces of definition of the namespace. As we have seen in the class, we are using the semicolon at the end. It is not required for the namespace. We can split the definition of the namespace over several units. So the STD namespace, because you have used this in your code, now you can understand what is the meaning or significance of this STD namespace in your code. When C++ was originally designed, all the identifiers in C++ standard library, including std cin, std cout, were available to be used with the std semicolon prefix. They were part of the global namespace. However, this means that any identifier in the standard library could potentially conflict with any other name you picked for your own variables or identifiers. So previously, whatever is std that C in out will be present in the global namespace, and there might be a situation that the programmer will pick that particular identifier for its program. So there will be a identifier collision. So code that was working might suddenly have a naming conflict with you. Hash included a new file from the standard library. Or worse, programs that would compile under one version of C++ might not under a future version of C++. As new identifiers introduced into the standard library would have a naming conflict with already written code. So C++ moved all of the functionality in the standard library. So there is a problem with all these things. So what they have done, just they have moved all their standard functionality into a standard library called namespace std. It is a short form for the standard. It turns out that std count's name is not really std count. It's actually just count, and std is the name of the namespace that identifiers cout is part of. Because cout is defined in the std namespace, the name count won't conflict with any other object or functions named count that we declared in the global namespace. So with the help of this std namespace, there will not be any collision between the standard library functions, variables, and classes, which is already defined, and the programmer defined classes, variables, and functions. Similarly, when accessing identifier that is defined in the namespace, that is your count, you need to tell the compiler that we are working for identifier defined inside the namespace std. That's why we have used std namespace whenever we are starting the code. So next is nested classes in C++. Give me more few minutes. Nested, what is meant by nested classes? So a nested class is a class which is declared in another enclosing class. A nested class is member and such as has the same access rights as other members. So member of the enclosing class have no special access to members of a nested class, and the visual access rules shall be obeyed. So what is meant by nested class? Suppose you are having a class. Suppose this is your class ABC, And inside this class, you will have another class PQR. Inside this class. So this class is called as nested class. This class is called as nested class. Class within a class is called as nested class. So with the help of example, I'm going to explain this. We have used these two statements, and this is our outer class. That is our outer class. Inside the private, we have declared one integer variable, and this is our inner class. This is our inner class. Inside outer class, we have inner class. That is called, this class is called as nested class. This will start over here, and it will end over here. So this is our outer class, and this is our inner class. And this is the way to declare the nested class. And this class, scope of this class is within this outer class only. You can't access this outside the class. And whatever variables are present, same rule, whatever you are having for the scope of the variable is applied to this. Whatever variables are present, you can access within this class only. And this class you can access within the outer class. So this is called as nested class. Next is local classes. What is meant by local classes? A class declared inside a function becomes a local to that function, and it is called as local classes. Suppose you have a function void. Suppose you have this function, and inside this function you have declared one class ABC. This class becomes a local class. This class becomes a local class. This class is defined inside the function. Keep in mind, it is defined inside the function. That's why it is called as local class. So I'm going to explain this with the help of example. So this is our function, void function, and inside this we have declared one class that is local. I have given the name as a local, and this is the start of the class, and this is the end of the class, and this class is wholly written inside the function. That's why it is called as local classes. In the main, you can create the you can call the function. I have not called here, but just see how to define the local classes inside the code. So just you have to define the function, and inside the function you have to define write the class local, and whole class is accessible within this function only, not outside the function. And these members of the local classes are accessible within this class. So all the rules that you have seen for your simple class will be applied to these local classes as well as nested classes. Following are some of the interesting facts about the local classes. A local class type name can only be used in enclosing function. You can use this local class within the function only. All the members of the local classes must be defined inside the class only. The local class cannot contain static data members, but it can contain static functions. Members of the local class can only access static and enum variables of the including function. Non-static variables of the including function are not accessible inside the local classes. Local classes can access global types, that is variables and functions. Also, local classes can access other local classes of the same function.